All right, so this is just my Ableton Live setup for worship from week to week that I use. Um, it's a little different this week because for Easter we're doing 6 songs. Usually we do 5. We have 3 in the first set and then 2 in the second set, but this week we're doing 3 and 3. So anyway, I pulled out all the stops in preparation for Easter to make sure that everything was good to go ahead of time because Easter's super busy. And made sure that everything was organized and put together correctly. And so I thought that I would go ahead and make this video to share with you just kind of what it looks like for my Ableton Live setup at Red Hill from week to week. So the first thing you'll probably notice is I'm in arrangement view, not session view. For this particular, for our particular flow of service at Red Hill and how I like to do things as a worship leader, I prefer arrangement view because it gives me more space to make things flow. Like if you look at the pads here, they all crossfade into one another, and like little things like that go a long way in giving me less stuff to be responsible for and to worry about during service. I think the biggest benefit of this setup for me, and hopefully I'll be able to explain to you why I see those benefits, but I think the biggest benefit of this setup for me is that it gives me some space to take my mind off of the logistical and technical details that I would otherwise be concerned with, and instead just focus on 1, on worshiping, 2, on engaging the people around me, and 3, on playing good music. Like those 3 things are essential. If you add on the responsibilities of transitioning pads, triggering playback and stuff like that, like it adds up really quick, and my short 21-year-old attention span can't handle all that stuff, I guess. So I like to minimize like my technical and logistical responsibilities during the set. And if I can automate all those things, I want to do that. So I just want to walk through like what all these different things are, all the different tracks and all the different divisions and why they're lined up in the way that they are. And the first thing I want to talk about are the locators, these little triangle flags. Each of these locators has a title, either for the title of the song that they start or the section of the service that they mark. And they also have in parentheses a letter on the keyboard or a number, and that is because I use the key map function to issue keyboard commands to each of these locators. So that way we can seamlessly move through the set. If we have to manually go from place to place, we can go Q, 1, W, E, 2, 3, so on. However, the goal of this is to just be to start at measure 1, press play, and hopefully not have to stop it or move anywhere or press any buttons whatsoever again. That's the goal of this whole thing. At the beginning of the set, you press play, let it go, and it goes. And you don't have to stop it. You don't have to make any changes. Don't have to go back and loop around to anything. That is the ultimate goal of this setup here. But just in case, I have these locators set up in such a way that we can move from place to place if we have to. And I want to make a couple notes about the locators. One is with the key commands. They are case sensitive, so if you type a capital Q in here, you have to press a capital Q to trigger it. And so because of that, I always have caps lock on when I'm working in Ableton, just because stuff like that is often case sensitive. The other thing is if the master play button isn't engaged, then even if you trigger the locator, the playback's not going to start, right? Whereas if you have master playback going, press Q. There you go. So that's it for the locators. Next, I want to talk about these tracks because they all do something pretty important. Like none of these are just like bonus tracks that I put in here for extra credit. You know, this is this top track here is called Markers, and I want to zoom in on one particular song. So let's look at Glorious Day. I have this Markers track here to denote where the different sections of each song starts. And this is one of the big reasons why I like arrangement view over session view. So in session view, if we were playing Glorious Day and we were rehearsing it and we needed to go back and do the bridge again, but not the rest of the song that came before that. As far as I know, and definitely as far as my drummer who runs Ableton knows, there's really no way for us to do that. Like, the only option we have is to press play and run the entire song again, and we don't want to do that. We are pretty stretched for rehearsal time, and so we want to be efficient with that. And so if we have to start the bridge, we have to start at the bridge because that's the issue with the song. All we have to do is go to the markers track, find the bridge section,
2, 3, 4,
and there we go. Now, how do I make these markers? This is just a MIDI track that I added in, and then these are just MIDI clips that I added in like any other MIDI clip, double clicking, and then there's no sound, no notes, no MIDI commands attached to it. I just titled it. So it's pretty much just a text box, a MIDI clip that's just a text box. So that's what the markers track is. Next is the tempo track. So if you look at this whole timeline here, Ableton sees this whole thing from measure 1 to measure 800 something, 700 something as one song. And so because of that, it should have one consistent tempo from beginning to end, unless you specifically tell it to have another tempo. And so these tempo tracks do that. They tell Ableton to change the tempo for the length of the track, and it's looped because every time it repeats itself, it issues that command again. I found that if I just have one long track, then it starts to slowly readjust the tempo to the default tempo. So this is an audio clip that I recorded that has no sound to it, and it's one measure long. And so I have to, I turn warp on, I warp it, click no, and then I make it the tempo leader. The tempo leader will override this tempo here. So I make it the tempo leader, type in the tempo of the song, and then I loop it, make sure the length is one measure, and I take the clip and loop it through the length of the song. And then that's how I do that. So that's the tempo track. Next is the playback. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the MP3 of the song I have in place, and I have it there mainly to as I'm creating all the other stuff like the cue and the click and the markers and stuff like that. I have this in place so I can listen back to it to make sure everything lines up correctly. Another reason why I have it here is in case of emergencies, my band can listen to the MP3 during rehearsal. Usually this track is off, but if we get to rehearsal and nobody's listened to the song, maybe I was a dummy and I told them on Friday, hey, we're going to play a new song. Then at rehearsal, if we have to, I'll route the playback to the same output as the click track. And then I'll make the playback a little bit less volume so that we can listen to the song and play along to it during rehearsal. We've only had to do that like once or twice, but I have that option in case I need it. Next is the click track. This is pretty simple, just a standard MIDI metronome click track. And another thing that I like about arrangement view is that this is looped over and over again as opposed to being one long clip. And so if I want to add like subdivisions to our click track, I can do it that easily with one measure, and then through the rest of the song we've got subdivisions. I do not want subdivisions, so I'm going to delete them now before I forget. And then finally we have the cue track. Again, this is pretty standard, just a regular multitracks.com cue package that I got loaded into a MIDI drum kit, and it just does what you would exactly expect it to do. I like to leave them the MIDI commands and the cue commands as smaller MIDI clips as opposed to one long track, so that I can move them if I have to. Like if I had to throw this together really quickly and I got a cue in the wrong spot, like say this one was a measure ahead of where it's supposed to be, all I'd have to do is just drag it and it's in the right spot. Now I don't have that on all of them, like What a Beautiful Name. I made that a long time ago before I figured out that trick, but I prefer to leave them as smaller clips. And then backing tracks, this is pretty standard. I put them all in a group as opposed to individual tracks just because I like to fold it up and make it really compact during rehearsal so that whoever is running Ableton isn't overwhelmed by all this different stuff. Now, one thing that I do want to hit on while I'm talking about the backing tracks are the pads. So these, as you can see, are just standard static pads. So I'm going to go back to measure 1 here and press play. It's just a standard static pad that goes through the whole length of the song for Glorious Day. And the reason why I have that is because I like to do the transitions in Ableton from pad to pad, right? So between Glorious Day here and Singing in the Victory here, I'm going to read from John 11:17 to 27. And I'll talk more about this space and why this is important in a second. But what I want to talk about right now is this crossfade between these two pads. Whenever Glorious Day gets over,
2, 3, 4.
you can see my pad for Glorious Day is going. Song is over. I've probably started talking, saying like, hey, I'm going to read from the Bible right now as we get ready to sing this next song. And it's crossfaded very nicely into the pad for the next song, which is in the key of C. And so I like to have arrangement view because I can lay these pads out in different keys horizontally and crossfade them into one another. And that's really helpful for me because a lot of people will, use a pad app on their phone, and they will, all you have to do is press the button and it does an automatic crossfade. But even so, that's just one more thing that I have to do. Like in this section right here, if I were to use an app on my phone or something, I have to press the button on my phone while I'm reaching for my Bible and opening up to the passage I want to read from and all that stuff. And yeah, it's pretty easy, pretty quick, and pretty seamless. But if that's one less thing I have to worry about, that's one less thing I have to worry about, and I want to do that. This crossfade here the pads are in the same key, but I have this here because this pad modulates a little bit, and I don't like that in the song. I want it to just kind of stay static, and so I crossfade into a different pad that doesn't modulate there. And then I have the same thing here going into What a Beautiful Name. There's a crossfade from C to D. And then at the end of What a Beautiful Name, I'm going to pray to end the first set, we'll start the sermon, and it just fades out. So that's how that works. Now I want to talk about this space that I mentioned here with this section. I have this here because, like I said, the goal of this whole setup is to be able to press play at the beginning of the set and not have to do anything else until the set is over. And so I have this space here so that when this song is over, I've timed it out. I've read this passage at home and just practiced it, and this is about the amount of space that it will take me to read that passage, and then I've added a little bit more for a cushion. So if I start reading, so the song gets over here, right, measure 122, and if I reach for my Bible and I start reading here at this point, then it's going to take me to read that passage about that long. And then I've got a little bit of a buffer here to do whatever else I need to do. And like I said earlier, because of the locators, let's say that the song is over and I've started reading and I'm reading and I couldn't open my Bible to the right page or whatever, and so I'm behind, we're running out of time, song's about to start, I'm still not done. All my drummer has to do is press 1, and it takes us back there. It takes us right back to the beginning, still using that same C pad. You can see I have the crossfade happening before the locator, so that way if we have to loop back and forth from here to here, you're not going to jump right into the middle of a crossfade. This is in the static pad, so that none of that junk gets thrown in there. Same thing here, I have the crossfade after this point, because let's say I'm reading, we looped back, and now I'm reading, and now I'm done. So all my drummer has to do is press W, and we're starting Singing in the Victory.
Intro 2.
It works really, really well, and I have had so much less stress in terms of leading and making sure that the transitions work well and making sure that everything goes according to plan and all that stuff, because it's all taken care of by Friday morning, you know. By the time I walk into rehearsal on Saturday evening or Saturday afternoon, I have all this stuff taken care of. So all I have to do is hand the computer to my drummer, make sure that he kind of knows the order and flow of things, make sure he knows when I might need him to loop back to a section or something like that. And then we do a dress rehearsal to make sure that like we like when we start rehearsal, we do one song to get our in-ear mix, and then we start at measure 1. I give a call to worship just like I would during worship. Say, hey, Red Hill, we're going to worship together. Would you stand and sing with us? We're going to sing this song, Glorious Day, about how Jesus invites us to share in his victory over death. We're in the first song. Here we go. During rehearsal.
Intro.
And then we just go through like we would during worship. And so because of that, like by the time we start the actual worship service, I'm at ease. I'm at peace. Because all the little logistical details that I usually sweat over are taken care of. Everything's ironed out. It's all ready to go. I don't have to press any buttons. I don't have to use a foot switch. I just look at my drummer. In fact, I don't even look at my drummer. We have a countdown in Pro Presenter, like a 5-minute countdown, and when it reaches 5 seconds, he starts the playback. Like, I don't have to even start the service. I just have to wait for the pad to come up, and then I start talking. And it's really great, and it makes my job so much easier, and it helps me to do so much better in terms of actually leading people in worship, actually being like a good performing musician, and to focus on the stuff that I really care about, as opposed to having like push 4 different buttons within a 2-second period. So this is just the basic rundown of my Ableton Live setup. Again, I think it works really, really well. One thing I forgot to hit on is that during the sermon, we have it at this space. And so when we get to the time when I'm done praying, right about here, you press the master stop button, and you just press R and launch into your response song. So that's it for my Ableton set. I think it works really great. And, hopefully this is appealing to you. And if it is, I'd love to help you get a setup similar to this and kind of think through like how this might work with your order of worship.